You're listening to Conversations with Chanda, a podcast that unpacks the community's grittiest, most vexing problems, hosted by Chanda Smith Baker.
Chris Montana, thank you so much for joining me on Conversations with Chanda. I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. It's an honor to be with you.
I understand that you were raised here in Minneapolis, or were you raised in St. Paul?
No, I was a Minneapolis boy, and
Okay.
And the distinction mattered a lot more to me as a kid too. You'd say I was raised in St. Paul, I'd have words with you. But
I feel that.
born in Minnesota, I was born in Indiana.
Okay.
But when I was 8 years old, we moved to Minneapolis. So I went to schools all over Minneapolis. We moved a lot, so a lot of different schools, but ultimately South High.
You went to South High School, one of the Minneapolis public schools, probably at the time, 7 high schools. Were you a sort of a kid interested in science and math? Were you a good student? Did you struggle through school? What was the story there?
I was a good student when I wanted to be and rarely wanted to be. So I think ostensibly I was a poor student. I was, I was the kid who would fail a class or ace a class. And it just depended on, like, I didn't have a lot that motivated me at the time. So I think I was a tough kid, and had a lot of problems going on, had issues at home and a lot of other things I was working through. And a 14-year-old brain's not good at that. I was being adopted at the time. So there was just a lot of things that were up in the air. And actually, but for the fact that I had teachers who were more invested in me than they had any reason to be. I'm certain I don't make it through high school. I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, we often have either parents with children like you, and probably like I was a little bit, or we have teachers that are trying to figure out how to get to students like that. Any particular things that they did that supported you getting through in terms of how they took that interest?
They didn't quit. I mean, honestly, I think that for me, at least, I can't speak to other people's experience, but for me, I feel like I gave every teacher and a lot of the adults in my life every reason to quit. And it's like I kept poking them. And there was my adoptive father at one point. He was a little upset with me at the time, because I think I was at that time at a juvenile detention center. But he wasn't happy with me. But he was like, "You keep trying, but you aren't going to get us to quit." And same thing. I had a teacher who we now have a product that's named after her. Her name's Louise Borman, but we all called her Frida. And she got with my parents because I had gotten involved in the theater program, and they were all worried about me. And she talked to them, and she said, "Just keep him coming, like keep him coming to theater." And that was my distraction. That was something that kept me grounded, and I wasn't particularly good at it, I don't think, but it kept me grounded and in high school. And, so they were conspiring behind my back to try to make something out of me. And I think that I see that all the time, honestly. I mean, I don't know of anyone who doesn't, either from the student perspective, have a story about some teacher who took that extra time with them, or the teachers that I know, they talk all the time about the extra investments that they make, either monetarily, as in because they don't have enough money to buy the equipment that they need or the materials that they need, but also just the time they spend with kids. Every stage of my life, there was someone doing that. I can name them all, going all the way back to first grade. Right, some teacher, first guy who took me fishing was a guy named Charlie in Indiana, Southern Indiana. Right. And I remember it vividly. All of those extra little touches, you may not think about them, but for some kid, that's going to be the memory that they hold on to for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I just ran into, I started out sort of in my career in early childhood ed, and I was doing managing childcare centers and after school programs and that sort of thing. And I ran a neighborhood center, and I run into some of those youth that are now grown that I used to interact with. And they will remind me of stuff that I did that I never thought about. And they, you were the first one that did this. Or I remember when I was going to get suspended and you came and said, absolutely not. And you sat there with me for like an hour until I stopped. And then said, are you ready to go back to class? And then from that point, I knew I could always come and talk to you. And I just think that these days where we're so quick to label and push and make decisions on young people or anybody really, that I think it's just a useful reminder that sometimes those little things, those investments, you may not even understand how they evolve a person in the long run. And so I just always like to say the names of folks that support it. So you made it through high school. Somehow you end up in law school. So I don't know what happened between the juvenile detention center and law school, but somebody intervened there. I don't
A
know.
lot, a lot of living. I mean, I've done a lot of different jobs, from working at a car wash to working at a Jimmy John's to then I was interested in politics. And so when I did go to college, to the University of Minnesota, and I still hadn't really turned that page. Like I didn't have the motivation yet. So I did the things I was interested in and didn't do the things I wasn't interested in. And that led me down a path to working for a political organizing group called Wellstone Action, which has since changed its name, but we did political trainings, things like that. And I worked in electoral politics for a little while, worked on Ellison. So then Representative House Rep Ellison wanted to run for Congress. So I ended up working with him on his first run and we won. And so then I worked for him out in DC for a little while. And just long enough to know that not only was I not good at it, but it wasn't good for me. It wasn't a space that I had ever really wanted to be in. Right. I was not interested in being a legislative aide for a career. I was interested in working for and with people that I grew up with. And those two things aren't actually as lined up as you would like them to be. So when I left there, it was one of the best experiences that I've had, because like I said, it wasn't the job for me because I didn't really want it, but I wasn't very good at it. I hadn't finished college. I had a lot of holes, hard skill holes, and I was good at talking my way into and out of situations, but eventually the lack of those hard skills, like you hit a wall. And that was good for me because it was a wake-up call. It was, hey, if you want to actually progress in your life and do some of the things you want to do, you've got to get serious about this. And so I went back and I went from, the high school version of me was a D student. I went to University of DC. It's an HBCU out in DC. Finished with 4.0, class president, et cetera, et cetera. And I went to law school on a presidential scholarship. And the only reason why I mentioned those things, because it's not about, me having a big head. It's that was the high school D student, right? Well, it wasn't a lack of, ability. There just wasn't the motivation there. So when I see other kids who are, whether they're acting a fool or whatever it is in school, I'm like, yeah, but that could be your future president, right? Like, you don't know why they are where they are right now. And I can speak from experience that it wasn't because I didn't have the aptitude to complete assignments on time or turn them in or whatever. I had no motivation to do it. So when I went back, I had the motivation. I had tasted failure. And that was my motivation, and kind of propelled me along. So that's how law school eventually comes into the picture. And the law career was short enough again to see into the future and see that it probably wasn't going to be the kind of future that I wanted, and I wasn't going to be the kind of dad that I wanted to be. And so I was looking for another option. And I'd always wanted to start a business. I always wanted to do my own thing. And I was brewing a lot of beer, but that didn't seem like the industry I wanted to go into. But distilling was new and it was interesting. And I love the science behind it. And so why not? Why not make booze for a living?
Yeah, before we talk about the booze making business you have, you seem to, through the story of your life that you're sharing with us, have a bit of clarity on what you're good at and what works for you. Did you always have that clarity? Because, you know, I'm always interacting with people that are like, I'm just not sure what the next steps are. Did you move when you had clarity, or like how do you describe yourself in that way, in that understanding?
I think I've gained a great deal of clarity, but I've paid the iron price in getting to where I am today, and still have a long way to go. At the beginning, and I think people who knew me, or some people who knew me in, my younger years, would have said I was a pretty arrogant guy. And I think if you're going to start a business, a little bit of that, you call it confidence, bordering on arrogance, can be useful. Because at the beginning in that grind, you are everything, right? You're every job, and you have to believe that you can succeed. If you don't have that, then you're almost certain to fail. But over the years, I have learned either from influential teachers, one of whom I had in the University of DC, and also just through life experience, that the more I hand off, the better I am. And that it's not about, there's no one is good at everything. If anyone says they're good at business, you call their bluff, because business is too big of an umbrella to have anyone who is actually competent at every single piece of it. There are parts of the business that I run that I'm good at, and then there's a whole bunch of parts I'm not good at. And the more I could find other people who were better than me and smarter than me that I could work with and not stand in their way, but learn from them, the more that I've done that, the stronger I've become, the more I've learned, right? We talk a lot about, and it's kind of a running theme with me, about perspective, and you only have your own, right? And I often tell the story about the blind men touching the elephant, that I think people generally understand that story, that they all describe the elephant and they're all wrong, but they're all telling the truth, because all they can do is speak to their experience based off of which part of the elephant they touched. And so for me, I know now, although I didn't necessarily know it when I started, but I know now that the real value is bring in as many people as you can to touch the elephant. And the different perspectives, and the more perspectives you surround yourself with, the better off you will be. And then figure out where you fit into that. And so I fit into it. I'm, as my staff likes to tell me, they're like, well, you're the vision guy, like you figure things out, but you're not always the best at executing everything. It's like, there's some truth to that, right? And so I need to make sure I'm surrounded by those people who are good at executing and who also can share that vision.
Mm-hmm. My very first interview when I started this podcast was with Van Jones. And at the conclusion of the conversation, after the recording goes off, we had this interesting conversation that has stuck with me for a long time. And he said, I asked him to give me his best advice. And he said, the ego is an interesting thing where you have to sort of have enough ego or arrogance to believe that you can do something that you've never done before. But an ego unchecked is dangerous. So you've got to find the right line between I can do the impossible thing that you're dreaming of, and I also need the help to do the thing that I'm dreaming of. And so that just reminded me a bit of that discussion.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
The other thing he said was take care of your spirit.
yes, and that I think I now get to say that because I work with an amazing group of people who really run this company and just tolerate me, and so now I get to think more about my time and the other things that feed me. But at the beginning of the business, I didn't. And I know what it sounds like when I'm talking to somebody who's in the first couple of years of their business, and someone says, take time for yourself, take time for your family, take time for those other things that made you smile before you started doing this. That all sounds good. But when you're in it and you're in that grind, nobody could tell that to me. I mean, this place put me in the hospital. And that was probably the thing that got me to say, okay, maybe I do need to slow down. But it's very difficult for an entrepreneur to think about, the stress they're putting their body under, the stress that they're putting their family under, the people around them that love and care for them, and because no one does this stuff alone. It's good advice. I just know how hard it is for people to take it.
Absolutely. So if we go back on the journey of your life, so you decide that brewing beer is not your deal. You go to a distillery, you like the science, and the love for that led you to starting the business that we're discussing now, which is
So it's Due Nord Social Spirits. When we started, it was Due Nord Craft Spirits. We went through a rebrand about 4 years ago to hone in a little more on who we were, not who we were trying to be. And yeah, it's at the very beginning of it. I'm sitting right now in what used to be our cocktail room. And when we first began, I mean, there was nothing in here, right? This is an empty warehouse. It used to be a motorcycle shop. There was nothing going on. The wall behind me didn't exist yet. We had to build all of this. And, I'm not a carpenter, but when you got a business that doesn't have any money in it, we got a $60,000 loan. That's not enough money to start a business. And so and my wife was also there too. So we were working during the day. I'd come here and distill at night. And it was a grind, but honestly, while it was a tough period of time, I also remember it pretty fondly, as there's an excitement that comes along with a new business and an excitement that comes along with doing something that's interesting and challenging, and honestly seeing a product that you made sit on a shelf and what it took. I mean, the first shipment that went out, we were bottling until probably 3 o'clock in the morning, and it left at 9 a.m. in the morning. And we broke a table while we were doing it, and a whole bunch of product fell down and broke. And it was, there's all this drama. So to see that first bottle sitting on a shelf, I think it was a Surdix liquor store that I walked into in Minneapolis, and to see it sitting on that shelf, I can't describe the kind of pride that I have. It's a similar pride to, if my kid gets up and gets a single at his little league baseball game, right? It's hard to describe, but it's there.
Yeah. You discussed some of the challenges of being an entrepreneur. What were some of the other challenges that you faced as you were building this company, this brand from the ground?
Well, challenge number one was money. Don't come from it, and didn't have access to it, and we couldn't raise it. People, I don't get to jump into people's heads, but for whatever reason, we had a difficult time raising those funds. And I'm very well aware of the fact that people who look like me hadn't walked through the door trying to do something like this. And we were the first to do it. And so I understand that. And it was what it was. The only people who would take a chance on us was a community development organization that would also end up being our landlord, Seward Redesign. And they helped us get leverage a city program to get $60,000. That's not enough. I mean, to put that in perspective, $60,000 won't buy you one piece of equipment, most distilleries or breweries. And we had to start the entire business with them. So that lack of funding up front put us in the same shoes that a lot of people are in, where you start your business, but you have no room for error. Right. And you don't have a choice. I mean, this is where the take care of your body, take care of your spirit part comes in. It's like, yes, but the only way that I can do this is if I keep my day job, working from 7 to 7, right, as an attorney. And then after that, do this at night, working from 7 to 4, right, as a distiller. And that's what I did. Right. And there isn't really time in there for taking care of your body or taking care of your spirit. But all of that tracks back to the original problem, which is that you were undercapitalized to begin with. You couldn't run the business the way people would think that you would, where it looks like a 9 to 5. That was challenge number one. If there was challenge number two, was probably just getting the validation for me personally, to believe that the things that I was putting out were things that people actually wanted. And we made a vodka. That was our first product. And I went to a lot of other distilleries. I've been to hundreds of distilleries at this point, but I visited a lot of places, and people were very kind to me and would take me back and show me how they did things, which was invaluable to me as I was putting together my own facility. But I went into one place in Montana, ironically in Montana, My family has no actual ties to Montana, despite the last name. And I put my vodka in front of a guy, an established distiller, and I said, I'm not sure if this is right. And he took a sip of it and he said, I think you really got something here. And I remember standing there and like trying not to have that ear to ear grin, trying to act like I've been there before. But I remember thinking, it's like, I could do this. Like, not only could I do this, but I did do it. And later with that same vodka, we won best in class at the American Craft Spirits Association. So those types of validation points of, hey, you can do this, you can kind of get over your imposter syndrome. That was a big deal too, but I had a lot of help in getting past that.
Yeah, for the financial piece, so you were seated with support with the 60,000. How did you overcome that, or um, how did that leverage other resources that came in to get capital? Because this is an issue, as we know, for many entrepreneurs, and those particularly that don't have the network or the background where they can borrow.
Yeah, at the beginning, it didn't really help leverage anything. I mean,
Okay.
the only way we could do it was I was working during the day, and my paycheck went to help finance this place. So number one was I didn't quit my day job. Number two is that I was married to an amazing woman who also had a career that she was building, and so she could carry a lot of the weight. I I was in a math class in college once, and a woman came in and she was like, marriage is a financial relationship. And at the time, I was like, that's a pretty crass way to put what's supposed to be a loving relationship and all that. But at the same time, nothing that we have built in Denord would exist but for that marriage to one Chanel Montana. And she, was our breadwinner and gave me the space to go out and spend all that time on building this business. I mean, we also had a brand new baby at that time. So the 20-hour days I'm putting in here, you notice none of that had to do with going home. I've only made it home 1 out of every 7 days, despite home only being a few miles away. And so she had to pay for things. She had to make the money. She had to deal with this brand new baby that we had. And that was our first year. That was brutality.
Yeah.
Now,
I need to
later,
meet this woman. That's a lot.
yeah, no, it's everyone. You can't have mine, but everybody should have a Chanel Montana in their life. But we didn't. Truthfully, the funding issue remained a problem. I mean, we were 5 years in still, and then we have a little bit of a track record, and then people would say, okay, well, now based on your numbers will come out. But that's what it took. I mean, we had to be a going concern for quite a while before people would take any kind of a risk. And I suppose that's the best way to put it, is that no one was willing to take that risk, or the risks appeared to be too high. So now we're in a different position, and there's a number of reasons why we are, and it seems odd to say that for a company as young as ours. I mean, we're 11 years old, but that makes us fairly old in the craft spirit space, certainly in Minnesota. So now it's a lot easier, but it shouldn't have been this hard. And I don't want to, I don't like to spend a lot of time thinking about, the way things should have been or could have been. But we had peers. I started this building. I had an advanced degree. My wife had one too. We appeared to be fairly stable, owned our own home. There were other people who had resumes similar and less on paper impressive than us, who were able to raise millions.
Yeah.
And some of that has to do with their access. Some of that has to do with banks being willing to take chances on them. They weren't willing to take on me. And so it shouldn't be quite as hard as our path. And so that's a big part of why we continue today to work on making that path a little easier for the next generation of entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I think that it's important to talk about those differences as we navigate the world, because there's still lots of room to go. There's policies, there's perspectives to change. There's blind spots to be revealed. And we know from just what's out in the number of stories for entrepreneurs of color, women, some of the differences that are felt in their experiences. So I appreciate your willingness to share that. Talk to me about your first big, is it a contract, your first big store you got in? I don't know how to even frame it, but talk to me about what that moment felt like. Getting
Well,
on the
yeah, getting on the shelf for the first time. So the legal structure that distilleries and breweries and any producer of alcohol is somewhat complex, but it can be distilled down to there are three pots that you have to play with. There are the people who make alcohol, there are the people who deliver alcohol, and there's people who sell alcohol. And if you can pick one of those silos, but you can't have an interest in any more than one. It's called the three-tier system. So for us, I couldn't take a bottle of my product, walk down the street to the liquor store and say, will you buy this? I have to sell it to a distributor. And that distributor then can sell it to the retailer. So when we first started off, at the time, cocktail rooms weren't legal. And tastings weren't, at least the way that people do them now, also weren't. So we couldn't invite anyone into our facility to do anything. All we could do was sell via distribution. And we had a distributor who was excited to work with us. They kind of snatched up all of the early distilleries, and we went from, and at the time we were the only craft podcast. So we went from having no accounts to having hundreds. And that was not what, now in my mind at the time, and this is again, rookie business, right? I thought this is great, right? Isn't that exactly what you want? We had accounts all over the state. And hundreds of them. And it was, an amazing thing. And to see your product in all those places. What I didn't understand then is that we didn't want to be in 400 accounts. We wanted to be in 20 accounts. We wanted to be in 50 accounts that were good accounts, because once you get into all those accounts, now you have to support them, right? Those bottles don't sell themselves. But I didn't understand that. And so we had this initial, kind of wave. And then it died down and we lost a lot of those accounts, and we had to, and this is why I say, like, some of the things that we do now and the way we do them, we paid the iron price to learn it. And that you can get overextended, and you can't jump at every opportunity. And sometimes it pays to go slow, build deep relationships and not shallow ones. But yeah, having those first retailers, which we can't have a contract with, they have to go out and want to support us. I still feel a debt to all of those businesses that took us in the very beginning, because we're in an extremely competitive space, and who are we, right? But they took that risk. They put their money where their mouth is. So I continue to feel indebted to everyone who supported us over the years.
Yeah, this is an awesome story. What impact on your business did COVID have? Like, did it go up? Because I know a lot of people were doing virtual happy hours, like it was just the thing when it happened, or did you take a hit during that time period?
It fundamentally changed our business. It definitely didn't make things go up. COVID shut our cocktail room. So at the time, by this point, we had a cocktail room. Little known fact, but the reason why we have cocktail rooms in Minnesota is one Chanel Montana, again, who was working at the Capitol and was our first ACSA, or not ACSA, our first Minnesota Distillers Guild president, and would be lobbying at the Capitol with a baby strapped to her chest, asking for people to let us sell directly to the public. So we eventually got that. And so in 2015, we opened the first cocktail room, and that cocktail room became, 60+%. When COVID hit, about a week before everything was shut down, we had voluntarily shut down because our staff didn't feel safe. And that cocktail room hasn't reopened. So when that happened, we thought that was the end. I mean, again, we don't have deep pockets. So if you lose 60% of your business, that's why you close. And so we thought it was all over. What ended up happening is, because, at least in part because we thought we were going to be a sinking ship at that point, we wanted to do our part within the pandemic. And so we took the alcohol that we had and we turned it into sanitizer and we gave it away. Ironically, considering what would happen later in 2020, first people we gave it away to was police departments and other first responders at homeless shelters. People then found out that we could do that and started to ask for us to do it commercially. And so we did that, and hand sanitizer allowed us to survive 2020. So we ended up having a better year in 2020 than we had in 2019, but it was all about our hand sanitizer sales. Our spirit sales just fell off the table.
Talk about the importance of being able to make pivots like that. Like, I don't even know how you get from that to that. I mean, obviously there's a vision, and just sort of seizing the moment, that has to be part of the DNA of a business. But um, is that the way that you approach the business in that sort of way? I mean, both, it seems like strategically and you've narrowed, but have you built the business in a way that it can easily pivot, do you think, at this point?
I think so. I think that the longer that we have been around, the more mistakes I've either gotten to watch or that I've had the pleasure of making myself. And if you admit that, and if you admit that you are fallible, then you have to always have in your back pocket that the thing that you chose to do, you may need to move from. And that might not have been the right thing. I think that the companies that don't survive are the ones who stick perhaps too closely to an original thesis after they're getting input saying you might be wrong. And so we've had those moments throughout the years where we're willing to accept that the path that we're on may not be the right path, and that we may need to change. A guiding principle for us has really little to do with business necessity and much more to do with where we see ourselves within a community. The pivot to hand sanitizer was not a business move. That's not why we did it, right? We did it because we could do it. It was, people couldn't get hand sanitizer. And we said, well, look, we can make this for people. And so we did. And it was entirely focused on what our community needed from us in that moment. And like I said, we didn't even sell it. We gave it away. But because we made that move, then, and this becomes a kind of a trend with us, we took a step towards the community took 2 steps towards us. And that willingness, I think, to not just pivot, but pivot to what, right? We didn't jump off and immediately say, well, we're going to make all the money off of this. And some companies did. And there are some of those companies who did, and they aren't around today, right? And when they're charging their $200 for a bottle of hand sanitizer, we didn't. We sold it basically at cost. And I think people remember that. And, I think that has served us fairly well. But we're in a tough space right now for beverage alcohol. I'm watching a lot of breweries that have been around for a long time close. I'm watching distilleries older than mine. Trailblazers closed down. A lot of other shops that I opened with or that opened after us here in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota closing down. And I think for us, it's not that any of those places were making necessarily bad products, right? But that ability to adapt and to change when you need to, I think, is much more important than having the best beer or having the best vodka or the best whiskey, because nothing ever stays the same.
Yeah. If people were interested in figuring out, so it seems like, just sort of the ebbs and flows of business. It feels to me like there's cocktail everywhere. Everyone's going to happy hours again now in person, on patios, all of that. How do people support? What are ways that people can support your business and you?
Well, if you're in a state that we are distributed in, then the best thing is go out to that bar, that liquor store that has us. You can go to our website. We have a where to buy there, and you can see the places where you can go walk right in and pick us up. And if we are not in that state, or if you look at that where to buy and it's too far away from you, then in most states you can also get our product shipped directly to you. If you're in the Twin Cities, we will be opening up the spiritual successor to our cocktail room that should be open in late September. And that's a very exciting development for us because that's, it's in the same neighborhood. It's about 2 blocks away from where the original cocktail room was, but it's also in the Coliseum building, which was damaged heavily in the unrest following George Floyd's murder. But that myself and a couple other sisters got together and rescued from demolition and now have brought back. And so we're very excited to offer that and to come back into the community as a place where people can gather. So yeah, either online, in person, and if you happen to be so lucky as to live in the Twin Cities, then we got a chair for you.
That sounds great. And I know that it is available on Delta Airlines because I have had a drink or two.
Yes, and I highly recommend one, and just so you know, I'm not put up to this by Delta, but I highly recommend if you have to book a flight, fly Delta, and while you're on that plane, treat yourself to a vodka cocktail, right? And I will just say that, well, yes, I don't get any marketing money from Delta for that, but
I don't know. Well, I don't either, but
I give them all the credit in the world, because the reason why we were on Delta Airlines is not because we went out and chased down Delta Airlines. They came and chased us down. And they didn't get a positive answer the first time they asked, because we were running a food bank at the time. And I was like, you can't talk to me about vodkas. Like, we haven't made vodka in how long? We got all our grocery stores are all burned out and looted, and we're just trying to survive out here and provide what we can for our community. They had to be persistent, and they were. And eventually we said, you want to know what? Let's look to see what it will take to do this. And we staffed up, we brought on the people that we needed, and they were patient with us. It took 1.5 years, but we eventually got on board. But I give them all the credit in the world for being persistent and for having a vision to not only have a American-made product, but to have it come from a Black-owned company.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to learn in that circumstance too, in that story around the ways that companies, people that can make a difference in entrepreneurs' lives in the business life, like reaching out, having patience, right? Patience seems to be a theme of this conversation. Coming back, believing in folks as they're pursuing their dream is it's invaluable. It's priceless, really.
Yeah, I agree. And what business as usual is to say, well, we tried, but there was nobody there. It's the same reason why people don't get hired. You look at people's companies and say, well, we would love to have a more diverse staff, but we tried and there was nobody there. And a lot of that is because people aren't at the level that you want them to be at. And sometimes you have to be willing to bring them to the level that you want them to be at and to take that extra investment. That's what we do as a company. Every single person who works in this company didn't come from the spirits industry. We've always been willing to, we want a diverse staff. We want women, we want people of color. And so we're willing to bring you up to where we need you to be. That's what Delta did for us, right? We weren't where they needed to be. They don't work with small companies like ours, but they were willing to, instead of going the easy route, just to go to another big company and have them provide it, they were willing to work with us and bring us up to where we needed to be. And so, and they, you may have noticed that story is not really out there. So they didn't do it just to be able to tell that story or to check a box. I mean, that had to do with their ethos and the type of people that they wanted to work with and what the impact they wanted to have. So I give them all the credit in the world, but as a model for even a small business, there's nothing stopping any of us from doing that, from saying, yeah, we do want that diverse workforce, but what are we willing to invest in it?
Yep.
Right? Put your money where your mouth is.
Put your money where your mouth is. Anything else we should know about your business that you would want the listening audience to know before we wrap this conversation?
I think our business rests on 3 basic pillars. The first one, it goes all the way back to the beginning, and it's when my wife and I were going through liquor stores and not happy with some of the offerings that we were seeing. It's that quality in the bottle is number 1 for us. It always has been and always will be. But the second pillar which is the one I try to talk about the most probably, is that for the people who come along this journey with us, right? People that I get to work with, that we want to be as good of a place for them and be as focused on them as we possibly can be. And so we want the staff, the team at Denord is incredibly important to me. And it's important that we learn from every bad job we've ever had and make sure that we don't perpetuate that for any of them. And the third pillar of our company is, how do we show up on our community? Right? Business should be a partner with community. Without community, there is no business, right? And so that has always served us well. And it leads us to think long-term. We don't do a lot of short-term things. It's always about long-term investments. Whether that's pivoting to selling hand sanitizer, or whether that's, throwing a festival or something where we know we're going to lose money, we know that when we show up for our community, eventually that comes back to us. And so the community is always going to be a big part. And that community is as broad as it possibly can be. It's not just going to be the Twin Cities community. It's anywhere where we are sold. We're in multiple states. And it's anywhere that we can show up in any way that we can show up. And so I think those three pillars are what make us who we are. And while that's all inside baseball, I don't know if at the end of the day, people also just like picking up their vodka and saying, hey, it's a smooth vodka. And, I'm not getting that hangover. And so like I said, the bottle is prime. But you don't really know Denord unless you know the people, unless you know how those people, all of us collectively, see our business as being an integral part of a community.
Yeah. What does Denord stand for? What is it? What does it mean?
It means the North. And it came from our original setup was we had about $600 to design bottles and do everything else. And we wanted people to know we were local. And so we picked the Minnesota state motto, which is L'Etoile du Nord. And our first vodka was called L'Etoile. And we thought that everyone would know that. And anyone who knew anything about marketing probably could have come in and let us know that was going to be a mistake, but it was. No one had any idea, and no one continues to have any idea what the Minnesota state motto is, or for that matter, any other state. I have not gone into any state in the union and had a majority of people be able to tell me what their state motto is. Nobody knows these things, but we didn't know that. And so that's where the name came from. When we did the rebrand, there were some things that we changed. And the name change went from Denord Craft Spirits, but we kept that Denord. People know us as Denord, and we will always be Denord. No matter where we are, we'll always be a Minnesota company, and so we wanted to hold on to that.
Yeah, I only know what it means because I went to a United game and give out a recognition under that name that my son received. And I'm like, what is this? And the little star and all the things. So I actually did know what Denord mean. I can't pronounce the front part, so I've got to work on the pronunciation of that.
Yeah,
I got a lot of things down. That's not one.
And the French would pronounce it with, much more flair and probably a little more arrogance, but L'Etoile is good enough for me.
L'Etoile, I got it. Well, Chris Montana, it's certainly been a pleasure. I hope that everyone listening has really gathered all the really useful sort of nuggets of wisdom that you have provided to us throughout this conversation, and a little bit of the story of the grit that it takes, and certainly the support, whether or not it was a teacher, your wife being able to, focus on the future, not the day-to-day, because, the day-to-day probably would have took y'all out, but to be able to really invest in the vision, in the future of what it means. And, I think that there's also something around the resiliency and the resolve of knowing that what you're building is right for you, and being able to take the journey where it takes you. I think there's something very admirable around that you didn't sort of throw in the towel, and that you're here giving back to community, providing us great cocktails around the city, and having a brand on the shelf that is representative, that allows people to see themselves and their future through the work that you've done. So thank you so much for that, and everyone that has contributed to the vision, which is Denord.
Well, thank you. And I'm not knowing, you never know who's going to hear this, but I always want to leave people with, I've met a lot of people who've done extraordinary things, but I've never met an extraordinary person. I think that we're all pretty average. And so the difference between the guy who, like me, who has the business is just that I did it. But I do believe that anybody can, if they want to, make some of these moves and do these things. You don't have to be Superman. Right. So I hope that if there is any inspiration to any of this, someone will say, you want to know if that guy can do it, a guy who was in juvie, then I can too.
What a great message to end on. Thank you so much.